Numi, Numi, The Lessons That Weren't Learned by Tiara Curry, Jazmin Edwards, and Kiva Tilford. New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated. It was founded in 1984, located in Fremont, California, and employing over 7,200 employees. It was closed by GM in 1982. Numi had many reasons for closing. They faced numerous challenges ranging from poor work design and lack of effective reward systems. This resulted in low productivity and poor quality caused by absenteeism, substance abuse, and violence. Managers carried weapons for personal protection. There were over 5,000 to 7,000 grievances that were submitted, and above all else, managers and staff did not care. The joint venture between GM and Toyota led to the establishment of Numi, combining Toyota's manufacturing practices with GM's resources, but GM failed to replicate it across all other plants, leading to the further decline.
Okay, I may reiterate some of the things that Jazmin spoke on, but I'm going to give a little background about the Numi plant. Excuse me. So in 1982, General Motors assembly plant in Fremont, California, closed its doors after years of ineptitude and was said to have one of the worst workforces in the automobile industry in the United States. Some of the reasons for the plant's failure are plentiful, including a contentious workers' union, high absenteeism, and poor quality. The local UAW chapter allowed poor performing employees to keep their jobs by filing obscene amounts of grievances, which they would use as bargaining chips during negotiations. Employees would drink alcohol and abuse illicit drugs on the clock, which undoubtedly contributed to the plant's poor quality. Sex and gambling were common practices inside of the plant, and you could buy anything that you could afford, and I mean anything. Workers weren't allowed to stop the line for any reason, not even to repair defects. Absenteeism was well above 20%, which at times made production impossible. So, needless to say, no company can flourish under those conditions. There was a major disconnect between the line workers and management, which clouded the fact that they should all be working toward one common goal, which was to build quality cars. So, subsequently, GM closed the doors at Fremont in 1982 with no resurrection in sight. Then along came Toyota. In 1984, just 2 years after the closure of the Fremont plant, Toyota and GM came together in a joint venture, the New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated plant, or NUMI. NUMI was meant to be a learning opportunity for both GM and Toyota. GM needed a plan for the idle Fremont plant, and Toyota wanted to plant roots in American soil. GM planned to extract Toyota's industry-leading technology and apply it throughout the corporation. Toyota was to manage NUMI and spearhead its operational culture to mirror its plants back in Japan. NUMI was staffed by laid off workers from the Fremont plant and spent 3 to 4 weeks training with Toyota using their manufacturing perspective before they were allowed on the assembly line at all. 600 employees were sent to Japan for 2 weeks to work alongside their Japanese counterparts. This gave them the opportunity to acquire firsthand experience working within the Japanese manufacturing culture. NUMI was remarkably successful, a stark contrast from the Fremont plant. Cars produced at the NUMI plant had some of the best quality in the industry. Why is that? It had less to do with Toyota's technology and more to do with Toyota's employee-centric management principles. Toyota was committed to having an employee-focused environment and fostering a sense of pride amongst its hourly workers. The line workers were involved in every step of the manufacturing process. One would think that GM would be able to take these practices and apply them to their other assembly plants, but that couldn't be further from the truth. NUMI closed its doors in 2010 amid the auto industry's economic turmoil. GM went from being the #1 corporation in the entire world, not just the auto industry, with 45% of the automobile industry's market share to just 22% in less than 30 years. The company failed to transpose NUMI's success to the other plants. This is partly due to the fact that NUMI's daily operations were led by Toyota's management team. General Motors leadership didn't take the time to fully immerse themselves into Toyota's manufacturing processes and management style. So they paid the price for ignoring many of the intangibles that Toyota had to offer. Toyota, on the other hand, was able to open and operate their first independent assembly plant in Georgetown, Kentucky in 1986, which to this day is still a success. Questions surrounding this case include why wasn't GM able to learn and apply lessons learned at NUMMI elsewhere, and what could be learned from GM's decline?
Evaluating the issues at NUMMI, there was the presence of dysfunctional conflict, lack of situational conflict, and poor work design. Dysfunctional conflict, lack of positive leadership, and performance management were major contributors to the downfall of Fremont. There was no motivation among staff, goals, or responsibilities. The high rate of absenteeism, strikes, and sabotage led to slowdowns, and the number of grievances only made it apparent that the staff was very unhappy. The behaviors are known as dysfunctional conflict and are harmful to the organization. There is also a lack of situational control, which is the amount of support, loyalty, and trust of the staff. Due to all of the issues, there seems to be a mistrust between staff and the managers. In addition, there was no performance management. The leaders did not have a sense of value in the company, leading to poor climate. If the climate was positive, it would promote safety, positive outcomes, and shared values. A negative climate condones abusive supervision, fear, lack of cooperation, lack of citizenship behavior, and low performance. The behaviors at Fremont show that there is nothing at the company that is effective or efficient. The managers at Fremont need to exemplify the change that they want to see.
Okay, I'll now go over some of the proposed solutions and changes. Some of the reasons why GM wasn't able to apply some of the lessons that they should have learned at NUMMI to other plants. So it is widely agreed that General Motors faced several problems as they attempted to implement Toyota's lean manufacturing principles to the corporation's other assembly plants. In this next session, we will explore some of the key barriers, excuse me, that GM faced and what could have been done to counter those obstacles. So the first problem that will be discussed is change resistance, as GM tried to implement a new organizational culture, one that was developed at NUMMI. This resistance spanned across all entities within the organization, from management to the UAW all the way up to even the CEO. No one likes change, and old habits die hard. General Motors was once the number one corporation in the world with 45.5% market share in the auto industry. So, with that being said, as a company, it was believed that they had no reason to change. However, that percentage plummeted to just 22% and within 30 years, as I stated before. It is important to note that an organization must examine making major changes when there are external and or internal forces prompting that change. General Motors was facing external forces such as an advancing information technology landscape, including manufacturing automation, internal forces like high turnover and absenteeism, conflict between the UAW and management, as well as productivity barriers. Obviously, changes needed to be made, and there are a few ways to combat change resistance at an organizational level. First, it is important to be clear and direct and explicitly explain the need for that change. Most of the time, it is to save or improve an organization, a concept that most people are able to grasp. Secondly, employees should be involved in that change and understand the concept of continuous improvement. Another way to introduce a change in culture and combat change resistance is by implementing Lewis' change model, which Kiva will discuss later on. The next change, there should be thorough instruction and training and allotted time to master new processes during the change process. And that's something that GM should have definitely implemented at their other plants. The second thing that we'll discuss is that NUMMI thrived on the principle of teamwork. And that's one problem that they had when they tried to implement the principles learned at NUMMI to the other plants. NUMMI thrived on that principle. Team leaders and team members ran the shop floor at the NUMMI plant, and they were the ones who actually assembled the vehicle, so they should have been the one running the shop floor. Team members held each other accountable. There wasn't this culture of no snitching. They definitely checked each other when there was something going wrong. If they affected production or quality, they held each other accountable. When an employee was chronically late, producing poor quality, or became a nuisance to the team, they were admonished not by management, but by their team members. There was a sense of pride in the process and the product. This is because they were heavily involved in the production process beyond just the physical aspect of it. Their ideas were valued, they were consulted about changes and processes, and they were given ownership of their areas. There was a common goal, and they understood that, and that's to build quality, defect free vehicles. They understood the power of a common purpose. When you inspire teamwork and foster a team driven environment, it gives employees a sense of being and pride. This principle should have been heavily applied to the other GM plants. What General Motors should have done was structured the teams to be autonomous, with little to no managerial intervention. This way, any issues regarding team performance could be resolved internally without the threat of suspension or termination. The team leader should have had some disciplinary powers, but not in a punitive nature, but more corrective. The team takes ownership. Carefully selecting the best team leaders helps create that environment. From my experience, team leaders are chosen almost randomly or by seniority and not necessarily by the character or ability to do the job or temperament. In order to foster a team focused environment, team leaders should have been interviewed and put through a more rigorous team selection process. As a leader, you should demonstrate your commitment to the common purpose through your actions and decisions. Show enthusiasm, dedication, and alignment with the team's goals. Leaders should be selected using that criteria, and that's something that should have been implemented at the other plants as well. Another problem that GM faced as they tried to apply Toyota's manufacturing principles to its other plants is the existence of silos within the organization, and it's something that we'll discuss later on. Silos have been a long-standing characteristic of General Motors' organizational structure. However, it was a major barrier to GM's continued success. I won't speak too much more on that now because both I and Kiva have more to say about that. So let's go to the next slide. Another problem, and this was a huge problem that they faced in its ability to form strong relationships with their suppliers. GM typically had a contentious relationship with their suppliers, always aggressively seeking the best deal and sometimes not in the nicest way. This prevented them from being able to form mutually beneficial relationships. It was their way or no way. Over time, this led to the erosion of several relationships. And in the auto industry, you're only as strong as your employees and as your parts. GM was plagued with quality issues, ethical and compliance concerns, and technology and innovation gaps. What made Toyota so successful and to this day makes them successful, and why Numi was so successful is their exemplary relationships with their suppliers. Toyota's teamwork culture translates to their suppliers as well. They've built these relationships by establishing trust through open communication and long-term contracts. Suppliers are included in Toyota's long-term vision, and if problems arise, they solve them collectively. Kaizens, or continuous improvement concepts, carried over to their suppliers as well. They had training workshops, constant feedback between the suppliers and the company. Toyota always made sure to recognize and award their top suppliers, as positive reinforcement tends to lead to future positive behavior. Toyota also conducted audits of their suppliers to ensure that their quality standards were being upheld. Had General Motors applied these concepts to their supplier relationships, they could have avoided what was ultimately one of the largest losses in market share in automotive history. And so the last and final issue that prevented GM from being able to apply concepts that they learned at NUMI is the disconnect that the workers felt between Toyota's concepts and themselves. To them, the concepts were foreign and they were literally, from another country. And so it wasn't engulfed into their culture and they felt it didn't relate to them. It goes back to change resistance in a way. At NUMI, American workers traveled to Japan and were allowed to work side by side with their Japanese counterparts for 2 weeks. They then returned to the US, tasked with training and imparting the knowledge that they learned to their American counterparts. Training lasted 2 to 3 weeks before they were even allowed to touch the shop floor. The culture and expectations were set at ground zero, and therefore the workers felt more connected at NUMI. It's easier to acclimate to a system when you are part of its inception. I have experienced this firsthand being a new team leader at a new facility. When you help set the tone and culture and when you are properly trained, there's a greater sense of pride and ownership. By allowing the workers at NUMMI to be slowly introduced to new concepts and ways of operating and giving them in-depth training, the disconnect was all but abolished. And this is something that GM should have applied to their other plants too. So out of the 5 propositions and solutions, the best solution stems from the biggest problem, which I feel would be the elimination or mitigation of silos within the organization. I chose this solution because the existence of silos is by far the widest reaching issues out of all the ones that I discussed. As previously stated, silos foster miscommunication, inefficient processes, stunted innovation, and it causes people to lose sight of the company's mission as a whole. Had General Motors understood how damaging silos are to commonality and how they stunted the company's growth there would have been more departmental oversight and more stringent rules pertaining to interdepartmental communication. So let's explore what GM could have done differently in terms of transformational leadership. Transformational leaders transform their followers to pursue organizational goals over self-interest, which is ultimately what silos are. By definition, this is exactly what GM needed to do in order to change the individualistic mindset that department heads held at GM. When you can transform mindsets, then you can transform organizations. A transformational leader would have been able to clearly and effectively convey to department heads at GM that the common goal is to build reliable, high-quality automobiles as efficiently as possible. No one department is more important than the other, as it will take collaboration from all areas to make this possible. A transformational leader would have enforced transparency and communication between all departments. There should have been some sort of database or forum that facilitates interdepartmental communication. Meetings, workshops, etc. are always viable options that can be used for exchanging information and ideas. Transformational leaders could also break down silos by leading by example. Taking initiative by working with other departments is an excellent way to induce change. When your subordinates see that you are actively seeking support and input from other areas, they are more willing to do so. They're more willing to do the same thing. Overall, silos can be harmful to organizations by affecting effectiveness and competition. Breaking down silos and promoting collaboration, communication, and teamwork is important for fostering a culture of commonality, innovation, and success within an organization.
I'm discussing the recommendations for the changes that GM should have made. First and foremost, they needed clear and direct communication regarding the need for change that would have been essential for them to bring the lessons learned at NUMMI back to the plants in Detroit. They needed to engage the employees in the change process and encourage the concept of continuous improvement, and that could have ultimately led the company to not have to go through bankruptcy in 2009. Lewin's change model involves stages of unfreezing, changing, and refreezing company culture. This could have transformed Detroit's plants to the model used at NUMMI. It's a simple framework. And it consists first is the unfreezing. And in this stage, this is where they prepare for the change by creating awareness of the need to change. At NUMMI, this was the beginning when they sent the commandos and the new operators to Japan to learn. The changing process, once the organization is unfrozen, the changing process occurs where they lock in the lessons that they've learned, and then they refreeze. This is the final stage where they reinforce and integrate what they have learned into the organization's culture. Overall, Lewin's change model emphasizes the importance of preparing for a change, implementing it effectively, and ensuring that it becomes ingrained into an organization's culture for long-term success. This was done at NUMMI, but it wasn't translated to other plants. Ultimately, the lessons from NUMMI weren't.
The next slide. I'm sorry.
Transformational leadership and promoting communication and collaboration across departments. There's an analogy from one of the commandos where he needed a signature for $1 million idea that they had, and he was able to go directly to Mr. Toyota and get it signed off on. He remarked that if this had happened back in Detroit, he would have had to go through multiple layers of management and would have most likely been lost in the process. The ending of siloing of information within the organization requires a comprehensive approach that addresses both structural and cultural factors. Some effective strategies would have been to promote cross-functional collaboration, encouraging collaboration and communication across all departments, and organizing cross-functional teams. They needed to establish clear communication channels and implement regular team meetings, collaborative platforms, and shared databases. This would have ensured that information was easily accessible to everyone who needed it. They also needed to foster a culture of knowledge sharing. Over the years, GM had been allowed to run like several companies under one umbrella rather than a single unit. And a culture that values and promotes knowledge becomes successful like Toyota has. They also needed leadership support. The commandos reported back that there wasn't a game plan in Detroit to do anything with the information they learned from NUMMI. They needed that leadership support to break down the silos, and ultimately that wasn't found. They needed technology solutions, and they needed to invest in these heavily so that information could be shared quickly without a lot of hand-to-hand contact. It could have been something that was just ingrained into the culture by way of that investment into technology. And the breaking down of silos requires regular feedback and evaluation, something that GM had not been successful in the past. By implementing these strategies, GM could have saved themselves from their eventual bankruptcy in 2009 and could have possibly went on to run more efficient shops.
Okay. Good job, ladies. That concludes our presentation.
All right. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Okay, I gotta stop recording.
Okay.